Welcome back, Charles. I was trying to make the gambit of hitting all the runaways, but you're just right back on, the first returning guest ever to the channel. Want to talk to you today about your victory at the Living Legend tournament. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. It's great to be back on here and talking about, well, my new favorite format, Living Legend.
So I guess that jumps to my next question I was going to ask. Did you have fun at it?
Yeah, I had a ton of fun at the Arcane Games and Events Living Legend tournament this past weekend. It was just an absolute blast. We played 8 rounds of Living Legend format, 5 Swiss and 3 in the top 8. And just every game, I was just having an absolute blast. The games were so close, so tight. Yeah, a lot of fun. Probably the most fun I've had playing Flesh and Blood in quite a while.
What do you think made it so fun? Like, were you having more fun with that than you have been with like other Flesh and Blood recently?
Yeah, I think so. Each individual game just felt like there was a lot of small decisions and like more complex considerations. A lot of times, I was thinking about like multiple turns in advance and like kind of the game plan of my deck versus the game plan of my opponent's deck. I was thinking about more things as opposed to just like looking at one turn cycle to the next. I don't know. It just felt like because the decks were higher power, you had to be very careful. Right? I couldn't just be like, oh, I'll just, they can't punish me for whatever. Like if I made one little mistake, like I was going to get really punished heavily, and I really had to optimize every little bit because I knew the power level that both players were going to be putting out in every game.
Was it just like focusing more on macro game plans versus like how do I get more than 12 out of this hand?
Yeah, I think that's really what it came down to a lot of times. So I played Starvo this weekend, and I played a handful of mirror matches, which
so I guess we're going to commit the cardinal sin of we're going to be talking about Starvo. I'm sorry, everyone. We're going to talk about Starvo.
Yeah. I know we don't talk about Starvo, but we're going to be talking about Starvo just a little bit here today. Sorry about that. So when I played like into mirror matches, for instance, against other Starvo players, like a lot of times it was about, you would be card inefficient. But that was okay because you knew that, you dominate an attack that gets you tempo back. Or you had Awakening, which just is an amazingly powerful card that, you wanted to carefully manage your life total. And sometimes this meant being inefficient on a turn-by-turn basis because, you had this big catch-up mechanic. Even if you didn't have it right now, you haven't seen it yet. It must be coming in the next few hands or something. And you can kind of play to that out.
And I imagine that just like a mini game of like back and forth of just the threat of activation of it too, of they know that I know that they know type of situations with it.
Yeah. It was oftentimes like, turn 1, right? Somebody wins the die roll and they say, I'm going to go first. And then they're like, well, I have fusion, but like, I'm not going to attack you with it because I don't want to get Awakening on turn 0, right? Or they wanted to be slightly behind for most of the game because, once you got ahead, you could kind of push that tempo for a little bit. And those kind of things, I think, added a lot of interesting texture, not just to the Starvo mirrors, but in other matchups where I played against Prism or I played against Viserai, Phi, and Briar as well. You had these same kind of things where you're thinking about a longer term game plan and what they're trying to do and what you're trying to do, rather than just trying to micromanage over getting 3 to 4 points out of value out of each and every card.
So I guess we'll, with that thought, talk about some metagame things. So at the event, we had 6 Starvos, 3 Prisms, 3 Phis, 2 Lexis, 2 Viserais, a Briar, a Dromai, and an Icelander. I don't know why I was using my thumb to count all of that, but I was. Deal with it. And then for top 8, we had Briar, 2 Phis, a Dromai, a Lexi, and 3 Starvos. I guess my first question leading into this is, do you think this was an indicative representation of what the meta is going to look like for Living Legend?
Yeah, going forward, I'm not sure that this isn't going to be the exact meta game that we're going to see probably at the Battle Hardened in Barcelona at Worlds, where it's probably the biggest event for Living Legend going forward. I don't think this is exactly what we'll see, but it's a good first look at some of the power players of the format. I was definitely kind of surprised to see some things like Lexi and Dromai. Those were decks that I just didn't think would show up at all, right? If you looked at their list, they were actually pretty close to what you'd see in Classic Constructed, with a few tweaks here and there, but those heroes haven't had too much of their really big power cards banned, and of course the heroes themselves aren't Living Legend yet. So
I think that does speak to the power level of Lexi a bit, where I haven't watched the game yet, but Lexi took a game off of a Starvo, and that was just like a head shaker of the current power level Lexi.
It certainly can happen, and I mean, Starvo for all of his power that he has, he also is playing a lot of like 2-block do nothings, right? He's playing stuff like blue flash and blue like ice quake and these cards that like, hey, if you're not actually fusing, then you just have a bunch of bad 2 blocks in your deck, and Lexi can really capitalize on that. So if Starvo hits the bad run of variants, I totally understand how that could happen for sure.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's the live or die by the fuse. Are there like any decks that... So you mentioned a couple decks that you're surprised were there. Are there any decks that you're surprised weren't showing up? Anything that you think there should have been potentially more of that there was there?
Yeah, I was. So I made my little like sideboarding cheat sheet, for my deck list, and on there I had one section dedicated to Chain, and there was no chains in the room. Chain obviously was a big force in the meta when he was legal in Classic Constructed. He just had the potential to go really wide and set up these pitch stacks, set up these crazy turns by basically drawing free cards off the top of his deck with his hero power, and nobody decided to bring it.
There with Starvo as most broken decks in the game.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like that was definitely the assumption. And not only is it just Chain as we saw him in Classic Constructed, it would have been Chain with Seeds of Agony and with Duskblade potentially, if that's what you wanted to play, which was never legal in Classic Constructed. It was banned from day one.
And Creepers with that. Chain never had Creepers back then too.
Oh yeah, and Spellbound Creepers. So I thought that Chain was a very strong force in the meta, and based on talking with some of the people there, and I think other people noticed the same thing. They're like, hey, that's kind of weird. No Chain showed up. The common consensus was basically Warmonger's Diplomacy is very, very, very good against Chain. A lot of his plays want to chain things together, like Seeds of Agony and the other Blood Debt non-attack actions, and then use his hero power to make a shackle, and then play an attack or multiple attacks. And that just really gets shut down by Warmongers. And the nature of Blood Debt mechanic means if you get shut down for one turn, it can be very disastrous. And so a lot of players just weren't willing to take that risk that the opponent would have the Warmongers at the right time and have shied away from him. But I do think there is a ton of power in Chain, and if smarter Chain players and deck builders than me can solve that puzzle, or at least make it playable into Warmonger's Diplomacy, I wouldn't be surprised to see some powerful Chain decks going forward in Living Legend.
So you think there's some potential there with that, of we could see someone bring that to Barcelona and do well still?
Oh yeah, definitely at the tournament in Barcelona, people will be playing Chain. I won't say it's be the most popular, but people will be playing it, and maybe if there's a really good Chain deck builder out there that can solve that puzzle, we could see it do very well.
Yeah, I know. We saw some other interesting Chain builds too at the Team Blitz thing that happened recently. So potentially we could see something like that where there were some people playing almost a hybrid between Vinset and Chain. So maybe that's the answer of you go tall instead.
Yeah, if you're Warmongers really shuts down going super wide, and if you're just if you're focused on making the best out of those turns and just having a big tall attack, they're not gonna have Warmongers every turn. They probably have it once per game, and if you can get past that one turn, the deck is insanely powerful on every other turn.
Any other decks that you think are worth mentioning that weren't seen at the event, or no?
I think the Briar deck, I was expecting a bit more Briar. I think there's only one Briar in the room. Anthony Pham was playing it. He was playing a version that had Channel Mount Heroic and obviously had more Earth Blues and went a little bit taller than kind of the Ball Lightning Red Line Cheerios Briar, whatever you want to call it.
That's what I guess I was expecting to have seen.
Yeah, I thought those were the more powerful ones, at least historically, right? People played the Ball Lightning Cheerios version, and then once Ball Lightning got banned, they're like, well, I guess I have to play Channel Mount now because it's what's left, right? But for whatever reason, he decided to run this version, which obviously is still a very strong version. He went 5-0 in Swiss with it. I did play him in the top 8, and I think he said that I was the first Starvo that he played. So maybe that's very good against non-Starvo decks, but against me,
too, because they pointed at that as being one of the things that was to check Starvo back in the day.
Yeah. I do remember when I think it was James White gave that interview or the panel question. It was something where it's in internal testing, when Briar was kind of at her full power, even before the errata, with Ball Lightning and everything. Yeah, Starvo was fine, but it wasn't oppressive compared to that. So I think we could definitely see more Briars and more variants rather than just Channel Mount Heroic. You might see the more Red Line, and maybe that's stronger. But also, maybe the Channel Mount is is also just as good, depending on what you're expecting to see.
I guess while we're on Briar, just kind of a general thought. What do you think about Duskblade? Do you think, because like we've never actually had a chance to play with Duskblade, I guess in context of Briar specifically, but also Chain and Viscerai, and we don't talk about the redhead stepchild of Vincent. What do you think about Duskblade in respect to these decks? Like, do you think that's better than Rosetta? Do you think that's like something that they're going to look to do? Were people playing it there?
Yeah, I didn't see anyone on Duskblade, but I think Duskblade definitely runs into the Warmonger's problem, right? It just exacerbates the problem where a single Warmonger's like deterministically stops Duskblade and removes all of its counters. There's no way really around that. And so that's slightly problematic. And the fact of the matter is that like the first time you swing with Duskblade, or when it has 0 counters and you get the first one, it's worse than Rosetta Thorn by quite a bit, right? It's 3 physical then instead of 2 physical, 2 arcane, which is numerically worse, but also the split damage is very useful. And so it really isn't until you're swinging like 3 turns in a row do you like reach parity, and even then it's worse because it wasn't split arcane and physical. So if the games are going longer, then definitely Duskblade pulls ahead, right? As soon as you get to the 4th turn swinging it, it's much better. The nature of the Living Legend format, at least as I've seen it so far, is decks are very powerful. Decks are very fast, right? They're not going to give you 4 turns kind of uninterrupted. Like, if you have 4 turns to do your thing, you're probably winning the game.
Ending, yeah.
It's probably already over, whether you have Rosetta Thorn or Duskblade. I guess that's been my impression of how fast the format goes, is that Rosetta Thorn does tend to be a little bit better because of that.
Yeah, this is like kind of a hot take, but the like as time has gone on and we had like the over a year with Rosetta or whatever it was, I've wondered more and more, being like, man, was Duskblade ever actually ban worthy? Like I think about it and I'm like, maybe like now with Warmongers, that definitely like really cements the one can be significantly better than the other in that situation. But I wonder if it ever was better. Like I don't even know if Chain would have played it, because it's like the reason that it was good in Chain was its ability to be really good into fatigue scenarios, but Chain already had this like deterministic win into fatigue if you knew how to do the stack properly.
Yeah.
Like obviously it makes it easier where you don't need to like 19D chess your pitch stack, but well, I mean that is nice, like, but it is also nice to have a deck that has skill expression. So maybe don't give people the most powerful deck in the game potentially, with also the tools to be the most monkey brain deck in the game.
Sure, yeah, and it's also possible that the game has sped up since then, right? Just by the nature of the more cards you release, the more powerful every deck becomes, right? Because you can replace kind of your weakest card with a slightly stronger card, and over time, over the 2 years since they printed Duskblade and immediately banned it, decks have gotten stronger. So in a lower power format, definitely Duskblade's stronger because games go slightly longer and you get those more turns. So.
Kind of feels like this is a Starvo versus the world type of situation. Do you feel like it's that? Do you think that it's just you're either playing Starvo or you're playing a deck that beats Starvo?
So I think there's like 2 things here. One, yes, I think Starvo is the best deck in Living Legend. I think I would be remiss if I didn't say that. The deck's just really fundamentally strong. It does it has great catch-up mechanic in Sagar decks with Awakening. It should be like the default, like, hey, you must be this tall to ride kind of thing. Like, you should compare your deck against Starvo first, right? And see how it matches up. But I think the second part is that the Starvo deck that at least I played was pretty much a copy of some of the older Starvo decks that when we played it in Constructed, and then just like subbed out a few cards here and there, right? I took out some of the ice cards to put in Hypothermia, which is a great ice card, and then I found some spots to swap in Starstruck. And that's about it. Card. And then the deck already felt pretty well tuned. Like, I had the ratios down, it was correct. I had like my old sideboard strategy, so like I knew how to palette it, and it was a pretty well refined list, I thought. I mean, there's probably some optimization I could still make, but it was pretty close. And I think a lot of the other decks that we might have seen some people play were like trying a brand new thing, right? For example, a couple of the Viscerais that were there. They're trying they didn't make top 8, but they were playing this like OTK version with Bloodsheath Scalata and the new Sonata Phantasmia, I think it's called. That like if X is, makes X rune chance, and then if X is 6 or greater, your opponent discards a card, or discards 3 cards rather. And like that was a really cool concept. It felt really powerful, but it's almost certainly not like highly optimized. Right, it probably is like the first draft, right? And that's fine because hey, they're trying a new thing in a new format, and so I think there's a lot of room room for decks like that, and even like the Briars and Phis, the Stubby's Phi, like how do you incorporate like Plunder Run into that, which is a great card, and like just figuring out that those deck building decisions in a way that the decks have never really had to solve, I think is there's definitely room for other decks to catch up, whereas I think Starvo was, you know, maybe a bit more solved already.
Do you think that these aggro decks are able to keep up with Starvo, or do we still need some more time for them to mess around with the lists and try to solve that puzzle?
Yeah, I think the pure aggro decks, the Phis, the Briars, though Chain even, I think those are going to struggle into Starvo. Just Awakening is just way too good of a card, and so trying to see them catch up, like that's kind of like the first problem you have to solve, right? Like, how do you beat Awakening? Because like what's going to happen is, you know, Starvo's going to fall behind a little bit, cast an Awakening, throw a Pulverize or a Crippling Crush at you, and then he's going to get right back in the game, and he's just going to keep throwing big attacks, right? And how do you come back from that? If somebody can solve that puzzle through an aggressive deck, then they should be great, because those aggressive decks are really good into a lot of the other decks of the format. But right now, Awakening is just like this big thing that I think is keeping those decks down that only Starvo can really play.
Yeah, like Chain was, if you knew what you were doing, it could do that. Like, you had that Fridge of Armor, you could kind of find that spot to pivot into the Starvo and like execute your game plan. So that was like one of the few that really could. And now it has this additional problem though of Warmonger. So it's
Warmongers, yeah.
it's almost like the only aggro deck that could compete has just been removed.
Yeah, and so that's, you know, I think part of it might just be that, hey, this is a complete package. Like Starvo is answering all the questions, right, or is asking the hard questions of the other decks. And maybe it is, you know, there's room for innovation, right? We said, well, Chain is the deck that used to be able to do it because of Carrion Husk being able to block out a big attack. Maybe Vincett, right? I don't know. I don't think anyone has played with Vincett, but I don't know. That's pure speculation on my part. But the idea that, hey, I don't think anyone has put any significant amount of time into solving Vincett in a Living Legend format, and so it suddenly gets access to a lot of these high power cards from years past. Maybe there's something there,
Yeah,
or other heroes, of course.
Yeah, probably can count on like one hand the number of people trying to work on that specifically, Vincett Living Legend. So do you think there's anything that's changed between, like, it's been a while since Starvo LL, but has there been anything that's like really changed between now and then, between like new cards, metagame changes, new decks, anything that's like helped Starvo get better, or has kind of tapered off his power, or helped decks catch up with him a little bit? Like, you mentioned Starstruck as one of those, and Warmongers as well, like giving him a new tool to play with and a new thing to answer their questions. Is there any other cards that's like Hypothermia also you mentioned?
Yeah,
sounds like he's got a lot of tools.
I do think that Warmonger's Diplomacy is kind of a defining card in a lot of ways, and so I included it in my list, but oftentimes against decks where it was bad, I was just siding it out. So that means I had a ton of blues in the list because I needed to side some out. I really do think that card is going to like be the defining card of the Living Legend format for a while. Even more so than it is in Standard, or in Classic Constructed rather. You know, like it's good in Classic Constructed, and like, yeah, it's strong here and there, but you know, the decks that we see in Classic Constructed right now, you know, Lexis have played Trench to get around it. Azalea still kind of gets beat up by it, but then like Bravo and Icelander just don't really care that much. And so it's like, it's fine in Classic Constructed, but in Living Legend format, it is like metagame defining. And so it's kind of weird to see a card that's not actually banned in Classic Constructed be so powerful.
Yeah, I wonder what the game would have been like if we had that back during Runeblade's heyday. Because like, anyone new to Fab that's joined in the past like year, Runeblade defined Flesh and Blood for a long time, and it was just the thing that everyone complained about until we got a new thing to complain about in Starvo. But even then, people complained about it for a while, and it just feels so weird to be in such a span of time of just like, Runeblade's fine, it's whatever. Oh, Briar LL'd off of a defensive deck, like, whatever. It's like, it's not doing anything crazy anymore.
That there was like, as much as people are like not thrilled with how strong Lexi is right now in Classic Constructed, like back before Starvo in like the Runeblade era, it was much worse, right? It was it was like
Oh, sweet summer child, you have no idea.
yeah, like, so when you know LSS says things like, yeah, Lexi is the best deck, but it's like a reasonable bar for a best deck to be. Like, I see where they're coming from because they've seen the past metas of Starvo being the best deck and Runeblades being the best deck. And yeah, compared to those, I think Lexi is relatively healthy compared to those other best decks.
Yeah, and it creates a lot of metagame innovation and people attacking the metagame. Kind of interestingly, Chain did have that for a minute, and that was, I think, one of my favorite moments to watch in Fab. That first RTN season where, okay, RTN season starts, people think they know what's good, but then after like the first week, we're like, we know what's good. Chain is broken. People thought Chain was good. Oh, no, it's the deck.
It's broke.
And then every week from then on forward, we'd see this metagame development of everyone attacking the deck in a different way. Like, okay, Chain's broken. So what we'll do is we'll play Flick-Clacks and we'll play this Fatigue style into him. He can't beat that. Okay, the Chain adapted and played this like crazy strategy to go over the top. Okay, then we'll punch the Chain. We'll race him. We'll make it so he's playing all these anti-fatigue tools. We'll just race him. Okay, the Chain just played all the best early game cards to match your race with a Fridge of Armor and then just pivots into you and kills you. Okay, that didn't work. Well, they're trying to go tall Riftbind. We'll snag them. That's what we'll do. We'll shut down their snag. Yeah. Okay, I'll just stagger my Riftbinds instead. And it's just like every week the meta just kept shifting of how to attack the Chain. And that was really interesting to watch. Ultimately devolved into all these answers were wrong, but it was still really fun to kind of be there in that moment of watching it happen in real time.
Yeah, that's kind of how I felt. I mean, in my limited experience with this Living Legend format is very much, you know, you need to think comprehensively about, you know, what is your deck's game plan, what is their deck's game plan, and like really, you know, evaluate it on that macro level and not on the turn to turn basis. It's much more about like focusing on their power cards and when that's coming and setting up a long-term game plan, because you could afford to like lose turn cycles because you know you're going to win the war, right? Mm-hmm. Like lose the battle, win the war. Whereas right now in Classic Constructed, you can't really do that. Mm-hmm. And so I really liked that level of thinking in the format. And I think we'll see those kind of cycles that you were discussing going forward if this becomes a more popular format that is played at more events.
I don't disagree, but I also disagree with what you're saying on that of the macro thing. This might just be because, you know, I came from playing during that era of all these high power decks. So what you're talking about of that like macro game plan has just been like beaten into me from playing during that era where like I still do that now. I totally agree with what you're saying of like a lot of decks now do just feel like play the math of your hand turn to turn. But I don't know, maybe that's just like, I feel like that's just subtler now. And it's like, I think that's kind of goes back to our fatigue conversation last time of to people watching this video. If you haven't seen our fatigue conversation, click the video over here. Of like there is this macro game plan, and that's I think why we see so many people struggle into fatigue, where they don't have this the long term. It's just, what does my hand do? You classically said in that video, you draw your hand, you're like, that does 12, play it. This does 13, play it. This does 8, play it. This does 15, crazy, play it. And you're just like, I'm gonna block because you don't have a plan.
Yeah.
But then we see the players that consistently do well at a lot of these events. These players have plans into these fatigue decks. They know what they're doing before they get into this game, and they have a strategy mapped out. And maybe that's just something that people don't do as much nowadays, and it's just subtler now.
Yeah, I think the main difference is like it's a difference of scale, right? Like, yes, there are like macro game plans that people need to employ in Classic and Classic Constructed, and maybe I'm overselling it a bit, but I guess the point I'm thinking of more is like when your deck power levels are really high, like your highs are right, whether it be like building a board full of auras with Prism or Starvo fusing 3 turns in a row.
That's not a plan. That's just a slot machine.
Well, I mean, if you're pitch stacking it could be a plan, right? You play defensive and pitch stack, but
that's
right.
Fake. That's fake.
Or just like, you know, other powerful things, right? Like Stubby Hammer, Spy, or Channel on Heroic Briar, or whatever. When you have these like high highs, it means that you can more readily afford to play towards maximizing those, and you can sacrifice the short-term gains. Whereas right now in Classic Constructed, the high highs are just not quite as high, and so you can't afford to make as many compromises each turn playing for the long game, because even when you go off, it's not as big, right? And it's not as it's not as impactful to turn the corner that you can get in these higher power formats.
I
So
definitely
yeah,
agree
I
with
think
that. You did just kind of mention something there, though. We haven't talked about this
Mhm.
the entire conversation. Prism, where do you think she
Yeah.
sits in all this? Do you think she's still the I'm just here to face Starvo and I just sack to everything else? Do you think she even
Yeah.
still beats Starvo? Like, has Starvo just gotten too powerful for her to deal with, or was she never powerful enough to deal with her? Because I know I've heard from a lot of Starvo players in the past when I used to play Prism into that
Mhm.
meta. They every like Indy, the first like 6 rounds I placed Starvo. Every round I'd sit down and both of us would say, "Nice, Starvo or Prism," and both of us would go, "Wait, what? We both can't be happy about this matchup. One of us is wrong." And then every time I
Right.
would go, "Correct, you're wrong." But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously as the Starvo player, I was happy to play against Prism. So like, I
Mhm.
think it's Starvo favored. It's the classic like 60-60 matchup, right? Both players think they're favored. I don't think that the upgrades that Starvo's gotten since he Living Legend, things like the Starstruck is okay into the matchup, but it's like kind of coming at the cost of probably another red attack that would have filled a similar role. And Warmonger's obviously not very good against Prism because she always instants or just attacks. It's not really going to disrupt her, at least not in any meaningful way. Meanwhile, Prism has gotten
Eight
some new
less life.
cards. If you're playing the new version of Prism, but I mean, obviously she had that whole set of, or half the set of Dust to Dawn to have some new options, some new equipment. So I do think Prism has probably gained more on the balance in the matchups since, which maybe tips it slightly in her favor. I do think Prism's quite strong into Living Legend format. I'm not sure exactly how many Prisms were there this weekend. I did play against one. It was a nail biter of a game, super close. I felt like I was high rolling a little bit, like I was just kind of naturally hitting my fuses like pretty often. Maybe more than average, but not every turn, but higher than normal. And even then, it got down to 1-1 at the very end, and it just so happened that like I'm just like he has like a haze bending, and I'm like I can never kill that because I just need to punch you and hope it's hope it's good enough. And it was just barely good enough. I think there was a time where like if he had one more merciful retribution, and if he found it, I just lost. But just he didn't find it before I got him. But like yeah, it was a really close game, and I could definitely see that being Prism favored going forward.
Yeah, I think also to that comment on Warmongers within that matchup, I think that's also something where Prism potentially gained more out of Warmongers than Starvo did, because
Mm-hmm.
Starvo, I would say, was already fairly favored into a lot of those decks in the past. I don't know if that's still the case, but Prism historically was a dog to all of those decks, and you could win, but you were not going nice when you sat down
Yeah,
across from a
yeah.
Rune Blade. So this at least gives you a tool. And like I always felt like in the past the chain matchup was really close to being good for you, but it was just like a few too many things where you're like, I just need a few things to go my way now, and I have to get a little lucky. Where Warmongers is like, I don't know how chain beats me going Warmongers Arclight pass on like a late shackle, and just they may beat you because you don't see those cards in a game, but like if you play that matchup 100 times type of situation, like, and that's just going to come up enough times where it makes it hard for a chain to make a deep run, let alone the whole Starvo side of that matchup. But
Sure.
I think Prism gained a lot in that respect. Plus, she also got the I'm spacing on the name of it. I'll throw a picture up. The 1 for 6 from Dynasty, Phantasmal
Phantasmal
Symbiosis.
Symbiosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The text, largely irrelevant. It has text, but
Mm-hmm.
it's like the thing that Prism, when I was playing it at least, the thing that I always wanted the most was just all the war tunes. Just give me a war tune every turn and I'm happy. So just more copies, and it's a yellow for your Luminaris. Just great. That's a huge gain for the deck in my opinion.
Yeah. I definitely think if I'm going to Barcelona to play the Living Legend tournament, I am definitely thinking about Starvo and I'm thinking about Prism as like two of like the big decks to really look at and consider, and like I would consider those the top 2 decks in the format right now for sure.
Sounds like it's going to turn into the exact same meta we had before of Starvo, king at the top with his cowboy hat on. Prism's trying to farm Starvos, most of them unsuccessfully. All the aggro decks trying to find the Prism decks.
Yeah.
And then Starvo gobbling up all those aggro decks.
That is like a very high level, like the way I view the metagame, right? Is Starvo beats aggro beats Prism beats Starvo, right? Very simplistic. You have some wild cards in there, like if somebody figures out Viserai 1-turn kill kind of Scalata combo, like where does that fit into the metagame? I'm not sure. right? Like, I don't know, like, if it's good enough into Starvo, is it good enough into aggro decks, is it good enough to Prism? I couldn't tell you. So that's a bit of a wild card in the format. And plus, it's still a wide format that anyone could take their own pet hero and find a way to attack that triangular metagame in a unique way. So it's still a little open for sure. But yeah,
We
my
had the
first
same thing
impression is kind of
happen
that.
as last time out of the PT, where same thing happened. We had the triangle meta, and someone came at it from the side with Pheano.
Yeah, Kano, of course. So, so my Starvo list from this weekend had Shock Tremors in it. Never played it once, but I'm just like, SoCal has a lot of good Kano players, and I don't know if they're going to be here, but I'm not going to be caught with my pants down and not have my Shock Charmers if they are.
I did a
just in case,
Yeah, I did a similar thing at the first indie where it was like the weekend before someone won ProQuest with Kano, and it was like all over the internet that like Kano was like, oh, the first Kano win forever, and everyone was like hyping that up, and I'm sitting here being like, bro, I don't play Blitz, so I'm like, I don't know what the hell Kano does. I've never played this matchup before, so I just jammed AB3 into my Prism deck for the Starvo meta, and I'm like, I don't know what's gonna happen if I play against this deck, but I'm gonna have AB3 and just hope for the best. And I felt very rewarded because I sat down next to that guy twice during that event, and I was just like,
wow. That's funny. Yeah. After that first Pro Tour where 2Kna's top 8'd in the Starvo chain Prism meta, I also kind of determined like, I'm just not going to show up to a major event ready to lose the Kano, because I know if there's an opportunity to attack the meta in a way with Kano, some players are going to be on it, and they're going to find a way to make it work.
Reasonable. I think that's like a type of deck building decision that you want to make too when you're trying to make a deep run in a tournament, where it's like, that's something that you should really consider if you're trying to like win your like last rounds or something, like, because like if you make a deep run and they make a deep run, you're probably going to run into them, and that's something you got to worry about, or they top and you top, so like that's like a respect to them being good type of thing, and like, okay, they might have cracked the code, and if they did, if I want to make this deep run, I'm going to face that.
Absolutely.
So I realize this is pretty early, like literally like what, first event, is this the first tournament we've had for Living Legend?
The first one that I know of. Obviously this is setting the stage for Battle Hardened at Worlds. Is going to be like first big event, first like major LSS sponsored event for it.
Do you think that there's anything that we should be looking at for banning, or do you think everything is high power? I know it's crazy, but like, is everything broken so nothing's broken, or are there some outliers in the format that you think are kind of ruining it?
Well, I think if everything's broken, nothing's broken is certainly like the intention, right? What was their initial intent with the format of just like, yep, everything goes, just have at it.
I'm mostly speaking after Barcelona, because they said they're not gonna, but they did say they might look at it, I think.
I think the two defining cards right now are Awakening and Warmonger's Diplomacy. Those are the two cards that really limit the most possible decks. They're just like, obviously Warmongers, we talked at length about how it affects Chain. Awakening is just blanket against any deck that runs damage. 2 blocks, or like wants to attack you, right? Or like it isn't good on blocking, right? Because what's going to happen is like they're going to attack you with their Scars and Snatches and whatever, and then you're just going to Awakening and then hit them back harder, and they can't block and regain that tempo. So I think that's really limiting to those style of decks. And so those would be the two that, like, if you didn't like the state of the metagame, that's like the surgical strike. Take out one or both of those cards, and that opens up a lot in the meta. I don't think there's any other card that is going to be quite as defining as those two, at least right off the bat.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think it's definitely fine. Just let it ride out, and let's experiment with a broken format for funsies. That's definitely true that those limit things. I think that Awakening to me is definitely the one that I would look at mostly, just because that limits almost every single aggro deck. Anyone that just tries to attack, period. Where Warmongers is like a niche of decks almost. So it's and then that's still an anti-meta tool to some of those aggro decks. So
I think Awakening has the broader impact. Warmongers has the higher impact on a smaller number of decks, for sure. But that's why it's like those are the two defining cards in my opinion, and Starvo can play both of them. So that's why I'm playing Starvo.
Ook, do broken things.
And of course, I mean, maybe, and I hope it's true that somebody comes to Barcelona and just shows up with this off-meta deck that no one's really talking about right now and just blows it wide open. Because,
Bolton?
What was that?
Bolton? You
I
give no
won't. I
value.
won't put money on it.
It's anti-meta because you give no value to their awakening, and then all of a sudden get all your value in one turn. Genius. You'll never turn on awakening with your 0 for 3s.
It's totally possible. I mean, I think in the same in the same vein, one turn kill decks like Bolton or like
that looked like
Viscerai.
that hurt you to say. You're like Bolton.
Bolton. No, I don't mean to disparage Bolton, but like I think there are ways to do what he's doing better in other heroes. If you're trying to Saber's combo them, I think Viscerai is just a more consistent avenue. Bloodsheath Scalata is just really, really good. And it doesn't rely quite as, or it doesn't get disrupted quite as heavily as a lot of Bolton setup. But somebody could crack the Viscerai code. Somebody could find a way that Kano is really good into the meta because like no one wants to play AB because right, if no one is playing Kano or Icelander, if there's no wizards, then come in with Kano and blazing Aether everyone. So I think there's still room for a good rogue deck to come in and take down the established meta.
Kind of going back to like one of the first thoughts that we had in this conversation, we like started with the thought I like almost wanted to end on, which was when you were talking about were you having fun, and we started talking about like the power level and everything. What do you think about that of like high power versus low power fab and variance and everything? Do you like that more? Do you think that's better for the game? Because like I know personally my enjoyment has gone down a little bit too for that similar reason of just like the playing the hands to the turn cycle thing. Do you think have you liked that we've been going this direction of like down powering the game, or do you think maybe it was fine being a bit more high power level and having more exciting games?
I think for my personal enjoyment, I think I enjoyed the game more when it was the Starvo Chain Prism meta around PT1 time frame, which this kind of took me back to, right? And there's also a nostalgia factor, right? Just playing something you haven't played in a while is always going to be more fun. But yeah, I think for my personal enjoyment, I agree that I think Flesh and Blood was more fun back then, and that's why I like really want these powerful decks to happen again. And I think the nature of the Living Legend format, or the Living Legend system, not the format, just like the system of your heroes retiring out after they win so much, is just going to naturally lead to Classic Constructed being at a relatively lower power level, just because if something gets too high above that, they're going to hit Living Legend at some point. And so yeah, I think Classic Constructed is going to be this lower power thing probably going forward. And so I'm really hopeful that now that Living Legend format is going to be supported at least the Battle Hardened level, hopefully we get a Calling that has it next year, and then maybe it becomes a more common thing at other tournaments.
Maybe Living Legend format is the future for Fab of the next big format that's like going to be next to Classic Constructed. Like I think that's what Blitz was trying to be for a while, and I think this is like a better way to go about that, because like Blitz, it just felt like trying to Zerg each other a lot of the time, where this is that which is more life almost, so you can like have more space in the game for things to happen.
Yeah, I think I'm not a big fan of Blitz. I don't try to keep that a secret. I don't enjoy Blitz. So I very rarely play it. I think all the reasons that I don't like Blitz are all the exact same reasons that I do like Living Legend format. And so personally, I hope that going forward, Premier level events, your Callings, your Pro Tours, your Worlds, etc., those become a mix of some Classic Constructed and some Living Legend Constructed, and a draft or sealed or limited as well. But like for constructed formats, I hope it's a mix of Classic Constructed and Living Legend. I think that would be ideal, because then you get a little bit of the best of both worlds, right? Like, hey, you bought a hero, then it's it hit Living Legend. That's fine. Some of the events you can still play it in, but just not all of them, right? Because it's you'll have Classic Constructed and some Living Legend. And if that's the case, I think it makes it much easier to get new players into the game too, right? Like literally anything you can pick up and buy, and like there are tournaments where you can play literally anything.
I mean, look at how popular like Modern and things have been in Magic. I say have been because I haven't been following Magic right now, but I don't know.
Yeah. Same kind of concept, right? It's a lot of times when I hear like new people talk about trying to get into Flesh and Blood, their kind of hang-ups are like, I don't know, is that the unpredictability of the Living Legend system. They're like, hey, I saw this new hero, Briar. She seems really cool. It's like, well, hate to break it to you. You can't play her in tournaments. Or it's like, oh, what about Lexi? It's like, well, yeah, you can play Lexi now, but in a month, not gonna make it. It's like, okay, well, what about Icelander? It's like, when is Icelander gonna hit it? Like, I couldn't tell you, right?
Yeah.
And so like you end up like recommending like, well, what hero should I play? It's like, well, you should play Riptide, because that guy ain't
You're
gonna
safe.
hit Living Legend anytime soon. Right? And, like, that's not a good experience either.
Play
Like,
Dromai. It never converts.
or Dromai, right? Or like, they end up being scared off of, like, the good decks because they're afraid of them getting banned because it's an unpredictable schedule.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have this combination where, yes, Classic Constructed has this unpredictable schedule, but whatever your favorite hero is, that's fine. There are still, Pro Quests or Battle Hardens or Calling level events for you to play it in. I think that would be the best world to live in for Flesh and Blood.
I think I agree. I'm really looking forward to getting some. I mean, obviously, I've been missing Prism. I'm so excited to play this. I've been needing to scratch that itch for like over a year now. I was so excited. I think you might have been in the call at the time. I was like working on the Prism deck the other night and like strategizing all the deck building choices and everything. I was just so excited to get back in the trenches of working on that deck. Oh, I miss it so much. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you at the Battle Hardened, and you can congratulate me when I get the statue and everything. And
of course. That's okay. I won't be playing it. I'll be in the top 8 of Worlds on that Sunday, but
that's fine. You go over there.
You can take the statue of the Prism statue. That'd be awesome for you.
You can have it. I'll take the more important thing.
Yes, of course.
Well, thanks so much for coming on again. Again, where can people find you if they want to find your socials and everything?
Yeah, pretty much I'm on Twitter at tinman354. That's probably the best place to reach out to me. I typically try to answer most questions there that people send, so yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And if you guys want to see any more content with Charles, again, I made a video with him a little while ago about his win on Nationals, and I interviewed him, so check out the link wherever it is up here. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.